I really like The Emissary. I've seen a few videos of his. I find them enjoyable, find them informative. I feel like I always learn something new, even though sometimes I feel like I'm hearing a lot of the same information, or I have different anecdotes from my own perspective or just history in general that I feel I can add. But yeah, this is The Emissary, How India Colonized Itself. Not entirely sure what they mean by colonized in this context, but yeah, colonized.
What if I told you Britain's takeover of India was 2,000 years in the making? It sounds insane, but let me give you some context. I'm Indian American, and I grew up with two versions of the story. The Indian version, where the British were pure villains, evil incarnate. And the Western version, where the British civilized the subcontinent.
So the thing is like, I can understand, especially if you disassociate, like I look at the world very simply, where everyone believes themselves to be right, and there's someone who's more barbaric than yourself. So I can understand how the British Empire thought they were bringing civilization to the barbarians, because the British Empire was the civilized society. Like, again, it's fascinating how all this stuff we learn about the world, about how the world is round, and the person who brought that before the church was criticized and ridiculed and hated by the church. But then you realize that there were a bunch of barbaric nations, and some of which have gone extinct, that knew thousands of years ago that the world was round. Yet for some reason, the civilized society could not wrap their head around looking up at the stars and studying them to find out exactly where we were, where Earth was. It's so strange. It's so strange. This stuff has been done consistently, but for some reason, because they are seen as the top of civilization and everyone else is a barbarian, they couldn't accept any barbarian perspectives, only to realize that, well, maybe my flat earth theory is the barbaric perspective. It's so weird. But yeah, you have to look at it the mindset where I'm superior, you're inferior. So with that mindset, of course, they're going to write history as if they brought civilization, even though a lot of the civilized societies from this day are still emulating what the Indus Valley civilization did, what, 10,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, whatever the date was for that. I mean, come on. It's crazy. It's crazy. The Emissary is peak. He's always objective and factual, never letting his bias affect his videos. Yeah, I enjoy that. Of course, let's be honest, because he's like that, there are probably people that hate him because he's non-biased. They think he's biased. But yeah, I like that, how he's looking at it. And for me, I understand why people have that perspective, because they don't know anything different. They have that authoritarian mindset. I have family members that have that authoritarian mindset. Like, keep in mind, I only had one brother show up to my wedding. Only one. I have 4 brothers. And yeah, my parents showed up, luckily. But yeah, it's just that mindset is so weird, so weird.
Colonialism was a gift. I never bought into either, because both versions have the same problem. They're too simple. History is a Game of Thrones. And in this season, we are going to see how a trading company from an island half the world away came to a subcontinent and conquered the richest civilization on Earth. To understand this, we have to take an honest and uncomfortable look at how civilizations evolve, the destiny of geography, along with the brilliance and brutality of humanity. This is how Britain actually took over India.
Clash
So
of
most videos or
civilizations.
articles about this topic usually start with the same thing, the British first landing in Bengal. But there's a much more interesting tale that happened before it. Because this story is fundamentally a clash of two peoples and how they changed over time. One was ascendant, the other was descendant. And nowhere can I illustrate that more than beginning with Caesar's invasions of the island of Britannia. Roman chronicles describe this as the end.
I mean, that's actually fascinating, because you go back thousands of years ago, the text, the text of traveling towards India deemed it as a paradise, as a very forward thinking. In like the Greek philosophers, Greek writings and Roman writings, a lot of them, when they spoke of India, they spoke of this progressive area. But if you think about the constant invasions that India had to deal with, the Islamification and all that kind of stuff that kept entering in with this conquer-like mentality. So India ended up falling down because, again, it's a Hindu nation, and a Hindu nation is primarily I don't want to say pacifistic, because that's where the Sikhs come in. They're the warlike community who basically protect India, but more of a pacifist-like nation. It truly is. It's more of a pacifist, which I do not agree with. It's leaning against that a little bit, turning more defensive. You would think India would be defensive, but it seems more pacifist. But due to that, and not fully conquering that, in just staying in itself, it ended up not degrading, because you look at like the Western growing empire. What was its sign of prosperity? Growth and a warfare. That is how it showed it was progressing in life. It was conquering the barbarians. It was in Alexander the Great's. It was in the Roman Empire. That's just how it's always been. Even the British Empire. Every single time the Western society was showing progress, it was always done through conquest. In India, it's not that way. It was never that way. It was never conquest to show growth. It was just growth in the mind, growth in philosophy, like that kind of stuff. But in the West, it was growth through warfare. And it ended up becoming the main staple because apparently it was able to grow its influence around the civilized society as India was falling to the wayside by the constant invasions over and over and over again.
Edge of the known world, filled with barbarians who were barely clothed and liked rolling around in mud. The people painted their faces blue, lived in earthen huts, and even committed human sacrifice. So obviously a fairly backward place, even in ancient times. Contrast this with India in the same period. It was the richest civilization in the world, accounting for a third of the world's GDP share. The same Romans who invaded Britain complained of their treasures being emptied for Indian luxuries. Indian scientific advancement was top tier with pioneering medical breakthroughs, the greatest steelwork on the planet. Anyway, we begin here because I want to make the point that people are not innate. They rise and fall in cycles. And India's fall begins with three main things that hollowed it out before the British even arrived. And it all starts with a volcano in El Salvador. You see, around 536 AD, a Central American supervolcano called Ilopango erupted, causing a mini ice age across the world. In India, that meant the ceasing of monsoons, causing huge crop failures and famines. At the same time, the Guptas, a large Indian empire and architect of India's golden age, were also collapsing. So India begins to de-urbanize. Grain is short with the monsoons failing, so people leave cities to go to villages and farm to get...
Indian downfall started with Islamic invasion, and Hindus aren't a pacifist religion. Sikhism itself was inspired by a warrior class of Hindus called... Yeah, that's why I was talking about like the Sikhs are supposed to be the more of the combat-oriented part. The combat-oriented part. But yeah, it's just, again, it's all people's own individual perspective on things. Their own individual perspective on things. Imagine India conquered the whole world in the past and Sanskrit would be used worldwide instead of English. Well, then you'd start the argument with, what is it? It's Sanskrit and then like, is it the Tamil? Tamil, like people are saying like, oh no, Tamil's the original language. No, Sanskrit's the original language. Yeah, that whole argument. Then you would get that argument going on.
Food. And it's here where India's infamous caste system really calcifies. Geneticists note that prior to this era, there was a lot more fluidity in terms of people mixing. But around this time, the caste system became much more rigid, probably because India was becoming more rural. Now almost every other contemporary society had a class or caste system, but India's caste system became particularly strict. Society turned less on an individual level. While caste could experience social mobility, an individual could not. This also meant India's knowledge was more and more siloed into specific castes. You wouldn't meet as many artisan becomes banker becomes intellectual types that drove European innovation come later. Thus, India further fragmented. Nonetheless, India was still doing relatively well versus other lands. The 9th century Arab traveler Al-Yaqubi notes that the Indians were in wisdom superior to all other nations. Indian concepts like zero, the numeral system we use today, and various other scientific breakthroughs were absorbed by Arabs, leading to ancient historians like Al-Masudi describing how hikmah, or wisdom, originally came from Al-Hind, or India. Yet a few hundred years later, things became different. By that time, another famous historian named Al-Biruni describes how science ceased in many parts of India, and the land had fallen into ruin. So what happened? Well, Al-Biruni was describing the Islamic invasions of India. And I want you to pause to recognize this. Al-Biruni is not some Indian nationalist. He is a Muslim foreigner in the courts of the invader, describing how terrible and devastating the invasion was. He's lamenting what's going on here. So India really started to recede with the catastrophe of these invasions. Now, to understand the last factor here, we have to examine what happened when some of these invaders settled in India post-conquest. The big issue was many of these empires did not care for Indian science or development, but were rather empires of extraction. Their leaders saw the essential divide between Hindu and Muslim, or Turk and Indian, and as a result, many didn't identify with the common populace. That's why you see such grand monuments from this age, because these empires were insanely unequal. Economists have noted how the Mughal state was extremely extractive, where 655 individuals amassed 61.5% of the imperial revenue. Its inequality extraction ratio, a measure that shows what percentage of a state's economic surplus the ruling class seizes, was a gobsmacking 97.1%. That meant for every 100 rupees generated, the Mughal ruling class was taking 97 for itself, basically leaving nothing for reinvestment into mass development or peasant welfare. Because of this, the economic historian Angus Madison describes the Mughals as parasitic. And considering the data, I understand why. So this...
That's the thing. It's just like India's had that happen to them over and over and over again. It was a parasitic relationship when the Muslims invaded and took over. It was a parasitic relationship when the British Empire invaded, well, the East Indian Trading Company, which had a bigger standing military force than the British Empire itself, was able to take over. And it was so, it's the fact that India has constantly seen the same thing happen to itself over and over and over again. And that's the thing. So like we have the line, you either learn from history or you're doomed to repeat it. And it seems like India itself was always repeating the same instance that happened before. I'm not saying that they didn't learn from it or there were just opportunities that sold out their own nation, which of course that's normally how it goes. You always have people who are at the top, who are willing to sell out for a kickback. I mean, that's what we have politicians for now, willing to sell out for a kickback. And yeah, it's just like constantly it happened over and over and over again for over 1,000 years, basically, without fail. After one invasion finally recedes, another one comes in just like 100 years later. And then invades, stays there for 500 years. Then after that 500-year period, they lose strength, and then India has its land back. And then 100 years later, another empire comes in. It's just the constant revolving door of India's history getting eroded away. Why? Because, well, they needed the Great Wall of China, okay? India needed that Great Wall. They needed it to keep the barbarians out. What China did to keep the barbarians out, it should have been India that did it as well. They should have had their own Great Wall.
Crushing inequality and lack of investment in terms of development was the situation for many Indians on the eve of British conquest. And we have many corroborations of all this from various merchants, missionaries, and travelers that remark the shocking levels of destitution of India at that time. So it's important because even before the British came, India's GDP share of the world was shaved 10% by the end of Islamic rule, from 33% to 23%. India was a land in decline. But what about our British lads back on the Isle? How did they go from painting their faces blue to ruling every inch of blue on the map? This is the part where we gotta be real and talk about the excellence of the Englishman. I think history has to be objective. And I'll start off by saying, while I am an opponent of colonialism and not a fan of the British Raj, I'll explain why later, the British were a brilliant, brilliant people. And understanding why they were brilliant, why they won, is more important than being angry about colonization. To comprehend that, we have to go back in history and examine what made the British. And again, with three main reasons. While various groups migrated to the Isle after Caesar's invasion, Britain really started to become one with the advent of English common law, a mechanism that made contracts enforceable regardless of who you were. This is kind of a precursor to equality before law. Its advent empowered common English citizens and made them feel a part of the kingdom. It made them feel English rather than just from their locality. England, the core of Britain, started to unite through wars and this legal system. So while India fragmented, Britain centralized. Next, the British imported some brilliant ideas, mainly from the Dutch. You see, in 1688, a Dutch prince invaded England and became king, but only on the condition of ceding some power to Parliament. Thus, Britain began to build real institutions rather than rely on a single monarch for legitimacy, the most important of which was the Bank of England. And what really supercharged this bank were the Dutch financiers that the Dutch prince brought with him. Decades prior, these same Dutchmen created a slew of financial innovations and instruments like joint stock companies, national debt, paper money, etc. These all were implemented by the British in the Bank of England, causing an economic revolution. One of the big ventures that the Bank of England gave loans out for, and had companies chartered for, was the colonization of the Americas, something that became extremely profitable. Yet how would the British get there, and how would they defend their trading fleet? Well, the British decided to raise the Royal Navy. The sheer investment into this endeavor led Britannia to rule the seas and thereby rule global trade. And all of this was again due to the institutions and elites who had a vision beyond just taxing some peasants or personal glory. They believed in not just the idea of England or Britain, they believed that it was Britain's duty to be excellent, to spread their ideas and power across the world, to civilize others. India, on the other hand, did not have elites who really thought like this, at least at scale. So this kind of all made a flywheel. The Bank of England funded colonial ventures, which brought back more money, which helped fund the Navy that brought even more money in for the bank. With so much excess capital, British elites invested in things like science and technology and the pursuit of knowledge, not simply to further colonial aims, but also for the pursuit of knowledge itself. The British created systematic records and knowledge bases for everything, from financial methods, to shipbuilding, to cartography, to botany, and anything in between. It's what led them to things like the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution, while Indian elites were either fighting each other or in a dick measuring contest on who could build the biggest mausoleum. The British and Indians were structurally different people because they had a Grand Canyon of a difference in terms of elites. And that all came to the fore when the British set their sights on India.
Yeah, it has to do with like the structure and what came after, especially when India was still dealing with turmoil and enemies in its own gates. You can easily see how Britain, which had started civilizing itself, which had started forming laws for all people, even though not all people were equal, because they still had some people working in fields that weren't human, let's just say. Were human by birth, but weren't human. They wore a metal collar around their neck and probably dealt with a whip every now and then when they just didn't obey. But they could speak the language perfectly fine. I'm hinting at slavery. But yeah, I mean, the fact that there should be a law that everyone seems to follow. Like, that's what I think the U.S. built its constitution on, where there is no one ruler. It's the people that have the final say, but we have people that speak for the people, who are voted in by the people. It's no longer like that because we no longer have leaders, we have politicians. And politicians don't care about the people, they care about themselves. Of course, that's a whole nother tangent. But yeah, I mean, the whole fact that normally when I see, like, one thing that I see that's so barbaric in India is primarily every time I watched a film or any time someone would comment where it's like, oh, well, the Muslims in India have this law that they follow. What? What? Isn't everyone equal? Oh, no, because they pray 5 times a day, because it's like, what? No, who gives a darn about what their religious text says? Everyone should be seen as equal under the court of law, which is not the case. And that's still something I think is barbaric. I know they're trying to, I know they're abolishing parts of that, but in some regions it's going to be more difficult than others. I know India's a dumpster fire when it comes to that, but at the same time, it's just like the fact that that was even implemented in the first place is insane. But that was to appease the radicals. But you never appease the radicals. You have to shut them up. You have to shut them up. You can't allow them to get a voice. You can't allow them to get a foothold in the door. Because the second they do, they're just going to run amok, destroy everything. It's like playing chess with a pigeon. You can't win. You can't win. They just knock all the pieces off the board. But yeah, it's just... So they go into going back to it, the British Empire is going to India and seeing that, oh, these are just barbarians who are constantly fighting with one another. Of course, they're going to think they're bringing a civilization, because a lot of the history was lost. That's why it's important for historians to actually document, actually record, and not sell a lot of the pieces of history to third-party buyers. To document it, to give it to museums, to allow it to be understood where a lot of history comes from. Because what is it? Like, I watched a video where like 95% of India's history is lost because, well, it's most likely in someone's private collection. Most likely in someone's private collection. Because these historians who were doing, like, documenting India were selling the pieces they were discovering. Just selling them. It's yeah. But again, I can see how British Empire would get to India and be like, yeah, they're barbarians. Let's bring civilization here. Even though It didn't really work the first time. It didn't really work the first time. It's unavoidable. Every civilization goes through cycles of decline and rebirth, or it gets destroyed completely. No empire is eternal. I mean, yeah, look at the United States. It is so weird when I turn on the TV or like my father's watching the news, and guess what? I'm looking at a scene and I'm like, it's so sad what's going on in third world countries. Oh, this is New York. Okay. This is LA. Okay. This is Detroit. Okay. Because yeah, I mean, America, there are a lot of locations which look like they could be are going through things which are very third world-ish. And I don't want to be an insult with third world because but yeah, it kind of is. It's just like we're supposed to be above that, but we're not. We're not.
Because even though India had declined, it was still a massive source of luxury goods in the world. Textiles, spices, and so much more enticed the British to finally make that trek out to the subcontinent. What the British didn't know was just how ripe the land was for the taking. The East India Company did not imagine it would conquer all of Bengal or Delhi or the entire subcontinent. What happens next is a dance between chance and choices, and how that duet changed the song of the subcontinent forever. But the reason the British conquered India was actually because of the French. No more backstory now, I swear, okay? We are in India in the early 18th century. The East India Company had set up some trading posts in places like Bengal, Bombay, and crucially, Madras, which was near the vicinity of a French colony, Pondicherry. The East India Company didn't really have a formal army, just some light security personnel, usually a minority of British soldiers leading native Indian mercenaries. But in Madras, the British witnessed something. The French governor of Pondicherry got into a conflict with the Nawab of Madras and wrecked him with a much tinier force. The reason for this was because of European military tactics. You see, Europeans, as well as Indians trained by them, were much more disciplined in combat. The French and British had formal military academies that drilled their soldiers to fire muskets with discipline, to organize ranks systematically, and stay steady under fire. Again, the edge was down to institution.
I love the Patriot clip in there. I love the Patriot clip in there. It was perfect. It was perfect.
The British saw how European-trained armies could take on much larger Indian forces, even though the technology difference was not that large. So the East India Company started raising an army, and mostly filled with Indians themselves. Now this is a huge theme for the tale. Indians helped conquer other Indians. While the leadership of these armies were mainly British, the mass was Indians trained in European methods. But why did so many Indians join this army? Well, Indian rulers, especially around Bengal, where a lot of East India Company activity was, had a habit of paying their soldiers late, if at all. The rulers of these regions saw soldiers as fickle and unpredictable, so they basically nickel and dimed them. So what the British did was actually pay these soldiers on time and also drill them into discipline with those European methods we saw earlier. And eventually when it was time to actually test this force, they would pass that test with flying colors. The exam was in Madras. The French and British are backing different local Indian rulers for control of the territory. With the British position under siege, a clerk-turned-soldier named Robert Clive audaciously takes the capital with just 500 men. An army of thousands tried to take the capital fort, but Clive and crew held out for 53 days till reinforcements arrived. That moment sparked the beginning of Britain's ambitions for domination. It gave not just Clive, not just the East India Company, but also backers in London the confidence to invest in an even larger force for more audacious moves. The East India Company would then announce its intentions at a place called Plassey in Bengal. Clive, fresh from his victory in Madras, assembled 3,000 troops, 800 Europeans, and 2,100 Indians against an army of 50,000 men. Now, historians think those numbers are probably exaggerated, but the British were outnumbered. One of the funniest aspects of this fight was that it was kind of decided by a slap.
How can you slap? How can you slap?
Okay, not that one though, I love that meme. Prior to Clive fighting the Nawab of Bengal, the Nawab slapped the head of the Jagat Seth banking family publicly in court, then the wealthiest in his kingdom. To avenge this insult, the Seth coordinated with the EIC to pay off a section of the Nawab's army and stand down during the fight. So once the armies actually clashed, the Nawab's formation and strategy...
Yeah, that's the thing. It's just like, again, it's people, like, I can understand how one person can see, I am going to use this opposing empire to get back at this insult that has been done to me. So they think they are justified in their action of betraying their own because of an insult, when in the end they just handed more power to the people. Again, it's always those. If everyone stood against something, that the thing that's coming towards you wouldn't ever get momentum. It's the fact that enough people step aside or will start acting with what's coming towards them that it ends up destroying everything. That's the problem. If you just have just enough that step aside, just enough that join the opposing force, you've already lost. You've already lost. You need to always stand for what you believe in. You need to make sure the people know what they believe in. You need to make sure that you don't have sellouts continuously. because it's the sellouts that are the worst, the absolute worst.
collapsed with a retreat of the traitor regiments, while Clive's European drilled infantry destroyed the remainder of the Nawab's army, forcing it to flee. The British were said to have only had 22 casualties and 50 wounded. The East India Company had announced itself as a juggernaut. Soon it began taking on different empires and armies, one by one, starting in the east of India, then south, then the massive Maratha Empire covering India's north and west, and finally capturing northwest India. And often, the British were playing these empires against each other and switching allegiances. And this part is really underrated. Indian kingdoms were at each other's throats for centuries, and now a new force comes in with an insanely effective army and riches. So the British would play the broker between kingdoms, and once the time was right, they'd just take them over with a combination of military and financial might. Sociologist Marshall Salins calls this method the Stranger King phenomenon, where a colonial power would arrive as a neutral broker, but eventually take over all sides outright. They do this across India, and many times they did lose or had to settle for a stalemate, yet they kept pushing. But what separated the East India Company's army, beyond military tactics, was also how extractive it was in areas it conquered or kingdoms it subjugated. After the initial conquest of Bengal, its tax revenue was immediately transferred to the EIC. And here's the insane part. The Bengali tax revenue then funded every subsequent British war in India. The conquest of Mysore, the destruction of the Marathas, the annexation of Punjab. Each new territory was squeezed for taxes in addition to the East India Company taking over businesses and thriving industries like textile factories or spice farms. India did not only get conquered, but it paid for its own conquest. Meanwhile, London was living large off these profits as its leaders could not believe the success and riches emanating from India. And now I think we really have to go down this economic rabbit hole, because while the British conquered India with guns, they oppressed it with policies. This is the number that everyone is claiming the British took from India, 45 trillion. But the truth is, that number is wrong. Now, that doesn't mean British rule was...
Yeah, isn't it most likely more than that? Like, much more. I mean, if you're deprived, and like the atrocities that were committed during that time is astronomical as well. But it's like, there's so much that just isn't accounted for as well. Like, if you included like what roughly what a life could be worth at that point in time, and you add it on to the amount of money that is owed, I mean, in many lifetimes it would never be able to be paid back.
It's a blessing. As we'll see, British rule was a multi-part calamity for the country. And the first element of this was the drain. While 45 trillion is fake, the flow of money from India to Britain was absolutely real. The scholar Dadabhai Nauroji noted how 1/3 of India's revenue was captured by Britain in the form of salaries, pensions, and general payments to British officers. Yes, that means Indian tax revenue was paying for its own colonization. Critics of this line of logic claim that a lot of the revenue was spent on India itself, whether via schooling or infrastructure or the infamous railroads.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that's honestly what led to the revolution here in the United States. It was the fact that a massive amount of the tax dollars were going overseas to a government that honestly wasn't present. The people needed to take care of themselves. The people needed to police themselves. The king that was months away by ship was not able to send aid or anything, didn't have any armed forces or guards or anything here in the United States. So the United States realized that it's just like, why are we paying a foreign nation for policies that don't affect us, don't aid us in any way? You pay taxes to be protected. You pay taxes in order to have infrastructure. The problem was all the money went, nothing came back, and the people still had to do infrastructure for themselves. And the US was like, enough is enough. And they decided to just secede themselves, become their own free nation, a brand new nation.
But neutral observers like the American historian Will Durant tell a different tale. Let's start with the classic railroad argument. Durant notes how the British monopolized ownership of the railroads but forced the costs on Indians. And while these railroads lost money every year, almost 100 million in debt at the time Durant saw them, the British kept them up with Indian revenues. The railroads were primarily made for the extraction of India, where Indian raw materials would be taken not to local factories to encourage industrialization, like what was happening in Japan at the same time, but to be shipped off to British factories. Keep this industrial point in mind, as eventually we'll get to it, and it is extremely damning. But perhaps the least covered aspect of British rule was the expenditure on the British Indian Army. Durant labels them an army of fratricide, and that's because of what we saw earlier. It was an army of Indians killing other Indians. In 1926, the British Indian Army's cost was gargantuan, nearly 200 million, a tax of 3% on the earnings of every man, woman, and child in the land. And it's not like this army was...
The British still owe India over $1 billion in war debt from World War II. I mean, that's never getting paid back either. That's never getting paid back.
Defending India or even oppressing other Indians. It was used in British war efforts abroad. During the 19th century, India paid 450 million for wars fought for England outside of India with Indian troops. and sent 800,000 soldiers plus 400,000 laborers to defend the British Empire during World War I. This was an insane drain of resources for India simply to help Britain colonize other countries. One of the results of this drainage was the preponderance of famines in British India. And look, it's not like famines didn't happen prior to British India. They did. But as the historian Mike Davis notes,
it's the fact that all the food was basically taken and the people couldn't afford. Like, a grain of rice was more expensive than what they made to afford the grain of rice.
Book, Late Victorian Holocaust, the famines from 1976 to 1902 killed somewhere between 5 to 12 million Indians. Overall, British India suffered 30 major famines in 120 years, an even worse record than the famously extractive Mughals. India's per capita income remained stagnant or even declined during a century of British rule, while Britain's exploded during its industrialization. And here's the final point of the economic case, this idea of industrialization. The British systematically dismantled Indian textile factories and other manufacturing elements via crushing taxes and tariffs. They slapped an 85% tariff on Indian textiles entering Britain, a product that had dominated global markets for centuries. Meanwhile, British goods entered India at 3.5%. This ceased any hope of Indian industrialization. As I pointed out earlier, Japan created railroads to bring its own materials to its own factories, thereby expanding its manufacturing base and economic power. But India was barred from doing this via colonial policies and forced British monopolies on manufacturing. The result is a drop in GDP share of 23% to 4% by the end of British rule. And again, this is not simply due to a drain, but also a lack of industrialization. But that's just one aspect of this calamity. The most underrated impact of British colonization is actually how they fundamentally changed Indian society. So this is going to be the most interesting part of the video because I've never seen anyone really talk about this. But that's exactly what we're going to do here. Prior to colonization, scholars like Dharampal note that education was fairly widespread in India, across all castes actually. He found that in eastern India, there was roughly one school per 400 inhabitants, a ratio comparable or even better than England in the same time period. But the British would upend the system. Indian children were not made for schools, they were made to work in fields. Crushing taxes and policies caused a 66% drop of schools after a century of British rule. And as Will Durant notes further, only 4% of children went to school at any point. This dismantled Indian high culture and mores. The population receded into stupor. Those that could get educated were fashioned to be brown Englishmen, a phrase used by another British administrator, Thomas Macaulay, to describe those Indian in appearance but British in taste, culture, and thought, intellectual foot soldiers of the empire. Those groomed to help the British Raj oppress their own people. And that they did. One of the biggest ways this occurred was through the calcification of caste. Now, as we talked earlier, the caste system is ancient, but what the British did was make it even more rigid. They arbitrarily combined castes into groups and assigned preferential policies to them depending on how loyal they were. This resulted in things like the Criminal Tribes Act, where entire groups were labeled as criminal simply off of their birth alone. The historian Nicholas Dirks notes a specific example where a caste in South India, the Kalars, would be randomly picked up off the street and jailed if a crime happened in their vicinity. Not because they did anything, because of what they were born as. And this highly damaged India's social fabric. Professor Ajay Verghese notes that even today, former British provinces experience significantly more violence between caste groups than those ruled via vassalage by Indian princes. Even at the dawn of independence, the British would sabotage Indian efforts of freedom by constantly favoring the Muslim League, something the scholar Dr. B.R. Ambedkar meticulously notes as the British incited extremist Muslim factions to antagonize Hindus and even help the British. And while Hindu-Muslim relations were not a utopia prior to colonization, the open encouragement of an extremist faction like the Muslim League, just despite India at large, left a massive parting shot, the partition of India. So at this point, I know I'm kind of dogpiling on the British. Like, I don't like colonialism. I think it was bad, and the evidence seems to suggest that as well. But I do want to speak on the other side. There are
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like there's so many things to be said about colonialism. There probably are a few positives because I'm, I guess, a product of it. But the thing is, eventually you get to a point where you realize simply conquering is the wrong outcome. Like, I come at it from a different perspective because, sure, my mother, she could be like the typical colonizer since she's like the whitest of white people. My father's from Mexico. Like, I have Native American DNA in my, like, a quarter of, I could be a part of a casino. I could run a casino. That's how much Native American I have in me. But didn't need to find out all the I need to get my DNA tested, everything. But at the same time, it's just eventually you realize that have there been locations where barbarians needed to be outed? I mean, there were a few Native American tribes, a very, very few. Like my father was with my wife and made her watch not Apocalypto. It was crap. Well, it was a movie on like Native Americans during like the colonial era, and They were hunting down the people in powdered wigs because they would kill and eat the people with white hair because they thought that seed was evil. Having white hair was evil, and they'd have to kill and eat them. And there were a few tribes like that, very few, minute few. The problem is, during the Trail of Tears, all of them were lumped together and thrown into encampments. You had all these hunter-gatherer tribes all put in one group, tossed in one area, where thousands upon thousands upon thousands of them died on their transit over, and most of them couldn't adapt in the new territory they had been given. Only for like 100, 200 years later for them to be, oh, you know what? Not 200, but like 150 to 100 years later, it's like, you know what? Maybe you need your land back. And then they're given like protected land. They have a which is primarily controlled by BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. But at the same time, it's not a good thing to have the mindset of conquest and invading, but the mindset of being able to bring education and civilization is not actually a bad thing. Is not a bad thing. It's the fact that you view yourself as superior and you refuse to accept the knowledge of the land you're going to. I think that's the real issue. The real issue that, yes, you want to educate. Yes, you want to bring knowledge. Yes, you want to bring forward-thinking mindsets. Like, in America, we started to integrate very quickly. I mean, sure, a lot of Native Americans died to the common cold, but we didn't know how diseases traveled. Or the smallpox and things like that. We didn't know how diseases traveled. So a lot of them died, even though some of them were hunted as well. But at the same time, there was also the mixing of cultures. They tried to learn. I mean, that's how we ended up beating the British. We learned our guerrilla tactics from the Native Americans. They taught us how to fight in like jungle warfare. They taught us how to do that. That's how the Patriots fought. The Patriots would do jungle tactics. They wouldn't do the rules of engagement. No, that's for real battlefields. They were just farmers. Farmers with pitchforks, as it is in the Benjamin Martin from The Patriot, Mel Gibson. I absolutely feel like there needs to be integration, and I think that was Britain's biggest problem. They didn't integrate. They wanted to conquer. There was no integration in their minds at that point. It was all about conquest, all about taking from the barbarians, not teaching and integrating. Sure, was the U.S. still have a lot of problems? Yes, but at least they did something that the British Empire was, even though it was a part of the British Empire at one point, was never able to do in India. Never able to integrate in the society. I mean, a lot of Indians left to Britain, but they're still pretty much Indian. But like you could spot Indians around the world, and still they're pretty much Indian. They're the way they carry themselves, the way they think. I mean, it's like third or fourth generation that are born that really feel like they're native to that location. Like third or fourth generation born in the United States feel American. They don't feel Indian. They feel American. But before that, they still feel Indian. They still talk, not talk, but there's something about how they carry themselves. There's something about how they view family that's still more Indian. But yeah, I mean, you have to have the mindset of integration. You have to have that mindset of being able to see the whole world as one. But sure, we'll never see eye to eye, but we also want to be able to listen to one another. That's one of the biggest issues. They don't listen.
Some ways that the British had a positive impact on India. The introduction of English, now the world's premier language, gives India a lot of economic pull today, including via its burgeoning tech industry and global diaspora. Indian ideas are going to become global ideas because they're...
I'm going to be hated. It also gives them the ability to scam nice old ladies. Nice old ladies. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Well, not only India, but Pakistan and Nepal and Nigeria, and like anyone that speaks English can easily scam a nice old lady.
Being spoken in English. British institutions, while definitely being designed to rule instead of granting rights, helped India navigate its turbulent early years as a country. And that type of state capacity is really underrated when it comes to running a country. And even today, a lot of their infrastructure still holds up, including the railroads. But all in all, I don't think any of these positive aspects actually outweigh the devastation of colonialism. Yes, the positives are real, but they don't balance the ledger. Yet beyond all that, I want to end on something that I think captures the story a whole lot better than any statistic. When Caesar landed in Britain, Indians were calculating the circumference of the Earth. 2,000 years later, the British sailed the Earth and crushed India under their feet. Yet the British don't hold sole responsibility. At the end of the day, this is a tale where Indians screwed over other Indians, where divisions, a lack of institutions, and nearsightedness paved the way for an island to conquer a subcontinent. Indians have themselves to blame, ultimately. That's the real cost of colonialism. Not just what was taken, but the potential that was shattered. Luckily, India is still here though. Battered, complicated, frustrated, but hopeful. And now it's finally ascending. The question now isn't about blame. It's about whether India understands clearly enough what was broken, so it actually knows what needs fixing.
I really like the emissary. I really like the emissary. The way he goes about it, because it's like, yes, he's like, there are positives. There are positives. And the thing is, like, the railway system, which Britain is said to be like, oh, that's the greatest gift that they gave India. Was it? You literally had the Indian people have to put it down, put it all together, but you didn't allow them to manufacture any of the material. You literally had the mine for the material, then you had to have it shipped all the way to Britain, where it was forged and then brought all the way back. No, you could have done everything in India. That would have been far greater than having India have to flip the bill to sell all the raw resources to Britain, and then have India have to pay for all the raw resources to come all the way back, and then have India have to do all the labor in order to have this stuff built. It's like, no. I mean, I can understand, like, oh, there is some good, like, no. Not really. But it is sad, because if they would have tried to integrate, there probably were one or two which got to know the people and got to realize, like, this is a very rich culture. We should learn more about it. But in the end, it's not the people on the ground that had any say. It was the people across the sea that had all the say on what happened in the barbaric nation, rather than actually being at the barbaric nation and talking to them and realizing, see, that's again the difference with the US. The US was able to secede itself and become its own nation, so the people on the ground that dealt with the barbarians was able to see what the barbarians were going through. The problem in, like, India, the people who were dictating what happens to the barbarians were not even there to see what was happening to the barbarians. It's just oh gosh. Yeah, that is a tough one, but I really like the emissary. He's very informative when it comes to that stuff. Very informative. I think British Empire have learned from Ravana's Empire, and I'm not going to pronounce that next one, Empire, as British has done translation and decoding of many Indian texts. That's why they are playing very differently than tyrants way in today's time, so they don't get accountable for anything. I mean, the whole partition thing seems just like a convenient way to, instead of trying to make sure the whole thing works out, convenient way to make sure to distance itself enough for long enough to where now it has no say on what happens in India. If they would have helped and aided and made sure the partition either went through smoothly, or the fact that it was never partitioned to begin with, then Britain would have had to answer for a lot of the things they did. The partition just seems a little too convenient for Britain to it not have, it just seems a little too convenient.
You guys got a video? So bad.
And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Wait on that.